All right, so today we will be discussing segmentation, but before we do so, just let me introduce who we are and what we do so that you get an idea where the insights I will be sharing today come from. So we are Slashdata. We help the world understand developers, and in particular, we help companies who target developers understand their audiences. The three key areas in which we provide such help has to do with who developers are, and this is where segmentation that we will be discussing today fits in. So who they are, how many there are to begin with across the globe. Then second, what they buy, so what technologies, what tools they adopt, why they adopt them, and how happy they are with their choices. And last but not least, where developers are going, which means what emerging trends seem interesting to them, which they consider as being interesting, as promising. Okay, so how do we do that? Well, before that, sorry. So our clients who trust us with this kind of research are the top guys in the tech industry. So here's just a small sample of them. And here's what we'll do. So we run developer surveys twice per year. We cover 8 developer audiences, so 8 development areas if you prefer. Mobile, desktop, IoT, backend, web, games, AR, VR, machine learning, and data science. So we have roughly 20K developers in each wave, which is about 40K annually, because there's a little overlap between surveys. We have run 16 such surveys to date. Actually, we're about to launch the 17th one in a couple of days. We reach developers in more than 160 countries each time. And we do that through a network of more than 70 partners and channels across the globe. They're not necessarily the same guys every time. From small local meetups to big forums and communities, vendor and non-vendor alike, we make sure we reach developers wherever they are. Based on all this data, we produce more than 40 research studies per year. Now, just to give you an idea of the spread of our sample, this was our latest survey. As I said, the 16th wave, which ran between November 18 and February 19. We reached a bit more than 19K developers this time, 165 countries. Not all 165 could fit on this slide, so just a small sample of them shown here. Just some numbers there to give you an idea of the spread of our sample across regions. So it's not a single community that we cover, not a single geography. It's across the globe and across communities. All right, and with that out of the way, let's get into segmentation. So this is what we will be discussing today. First of all, we're going to look into if and how developer marketing and DevRel practitioners actually segment their developer audience and how. Then we'll discuss some basics of segmentation, so key principles. Third, I'm just going to touch on just some of the key drawbacks of popular segmentation practice out there and why these are a really bad idea in the end. Then I'm going to discuss our data-based approach and then why and how you should customize your approach for your developer audience. Finally, as Mel said, we'll be addressing any questions you may have. All right, so on top of our developer surveys, we also run a survey that we call Developer Program Leader Survey, and that we ask developer marketing practitioners several questions about their experiences. One of those had to do with if and how they segment their audience. We had 52 responding last time, and I was very happy to see that the vast majority, so 92% of them actually do segment their developer audience. Not sure what the other 8% are doing, but okay. And then the question is, how do they go about segmenting their audiences, those that actually do? So you can see that the most popular practices have to do with app categories, industries, verticals, geography, of course. And then towards the middle of the list here, you find technology considerations, so devices, platforms, programming languages, type of development, and so on. While things that are inherent features of the developer, such as age, experience, education, and so on, rank towards the bottom. The question is that a good idea? Now, to answer that question, we must understand what is a good idea, or in other words, what should a good segmentation look like? So these are the four, what I like to call the four pillars of segmentation. So in geek language, segments should be homogeneous within. In normal language, that means that members within the same segment should be as similar as possible to each other. Now, similar with respect to what, you may ask, and that is a very good question. Please hold on to it, we'll get there. Why do you want members within the same segment to be similar? Well, because you want them to react, to respond similarly, given a incentive, a campaign message, right? You need to know how they are expected to respond so that you can maximize response to your campaigns. Second, segments need to be heterogeneous between, or in other words, in simpler terms, they should be as dissimilar as possible. So two developers belonging in two different segments, they should be as far apart as they can get, again, with respect to this magic set of features we will be discussing. Third, and very related with the other two, segments should be what we call MEE, so mutually exhaustive and exclusive. Exclusive meaning they do not overlap, so non-overlapping segments. Why? Because you want each developer to belong to just one single segment, so you know what campaign, what offering to go out to them, reach out to them with. And you want your segments, if you put them all together, to be exhaustive, so to cover your whole population. Now, in the not so ideal world we live in, this may not be always possible, especially if you use a statistical approach where 100% is really not defined. There's always some noise. So if you are somewhere around 90%, covering 90% plus of your population of interest, then you're in a good place. Last but not least, the definition of your segments should be independent of the outcome you're trying to predict. Simple example, technology choices, tools. Which tool are they going to use, for example? If that's what you're trying to do at the end of the day with your segments, then the usage of those tools should not be part of your segment definition. I mean, if somebody's already using tool X, then okay, you know they're very likely to use it, right? So it's going around in circles. Okay, and with that, well, let's visualize that a bit to make sure you all follow what we're trying to do and why. So say that in a very, very simplistic universe out there, we somehow found that the best way to segment our audience is based on shape and color. So here you see we have 4 segments on the left, blue diamonds, the green rectangles, the other 2. They are similar within. Okay, so you have to be a diamond and you have to be blue to be on the top left. You can be a different shade of blue and you can be of slightly different size. That doesn't matter as long as you're a diamond and you're blue. So they're distinct. They don't overlap in any way. And you will notice that there's some odd fellows there in the middle space. They don't belong in any of these 4 segments and they do not form a segment themselves because they do not meet the shape and color criteria of any of these 4 segments, and they do not belong together. For example, you do have 2 axes there, so same shape, but one is red, one is gray, so different color. Therefore, they cannot be grouped together. And you have 2 grays, but one is X and the other is a circle. Okay, so having defined our segments, how do they help us? Through predictive modeling, what we find is that segments have different reactions when offered different choices. So our green rectangle friends there are far more likely to go for choice B, 65% likely, than for choice C, which is 20%. On the contrary, those orange pentagons there, they don't like choice B or robot friend there very much. Only 10% of them would go for choice B, right? They would instead go for choice A. So they have very strong reactions, very strong responses to different messages, offers. These don't have to be products. It's just a silly example here. They could be campaign messages. So, for example, we have a product that has a robot aspect to it and it has a mobile aspect to it. Then to the green rectangles, you would go with advertising the robot aspect, while to the orange pentagons, you would advertise the mobile aspect. And this way you maximize response. Why? Because if you just had this one single group with greens and oranges mixed together, then you would get, and you were to offer choice B, you would get a very low response as a result, something like 40%, somewhere between 10 and 65. Okay, so this is what we're doing and why we're doing it. Let's see if some practices that are popular right now are a good idea or not. So we know that many clients tend to use technology. So, platforms used. We also saw it in the first slide as their way to segment developers. Is that a good idea? No, for many reasons. I'll just give you a couple here. One is that technologies have the really bad habit, annoying, of becoming obsolete, right? So remember when Symbian was king? Well, it's not there anymore, really. Well, it is, but. So 1 year later, from 12 to 13, it had lost half its mindshare among mobile developers. We have been tracking this for quite a long time. So if you had defined back then your model based on mobile platform used, suddenly you would find yourself with empty segments. Nobody would be there, or very few people would be there. And there would be other people using new technologies that you wouldn't have accounted for. Okay, so the problem with technology is that they come and go. And if you define your segments based on those technologies, then one way in which you're in trouble is that you find yourself with obsolete segments and developers or people who are not accounted for because they use an entirely different technology. Another very, very important point that is the root cause of many problems here is that developers are active across more than one developer area. There is no such thing as mobile developer. Well, 5%, as you can see here, are only mobile developers, but the vast majority of developers are active across more than one developer area. Simple example, somebody has a backend in the cloud, right? And they have, say, a mobile front end, and they have an ML algorithm as part of their product, their app. Okay, so they're active across 3 sectors in this example. So what this says here, so what I'm showing you here with this graph is how focused developers are within each of these sectors. And even for web, where that is the more focused, has the more loyal developers, let's say, only 8% of web developers are only into web. 92% are all doing something else. And if you look at the bottom of this list, you'll find all the emerging sectors, VR, AR, machine learning. And it makes perfect sense because developers in these areas mostly come from other sectors. They have some background in some other area than just pouring into the new sector, exploring the waters. Okay, so what does this mean for segmentation? It means that even if you're strictly interested in one sector only, you still need to consider what developers are doing in the other sectors in which they're active, because their choices in other sectors, their experiences in other sectors are bound to influence what they're doing in your sector of interest. If you don't take that into account, then you will be observing behavior that you will not be able to explain. You will consider it as noise, while in fact it's not noise at all. It stems from their choices in other areas of development. Okay, another issue is with developers being active across different areas, not just the technologies they may be using elsewhere, but also their motivations. So we have developed several years now, and we have put it to the test several times. It works every single time. A motivation-based, an outcome-based model, which is based on the main goal that developers have in each of the areas they're involved in. So roughly we group those, and here you can see all the segments that we have as rows and the sectors on the right, and you can see which segments apply to what sector. Roughly grouped together, we have segments that have to do with self or community improvement, such as explorers. This is a really important segment throughout and applies to all sectors. These are the guys who explore, that they're not just having fun, but they're not professional either. They are trying to gain experience in order to monetize in the future somehow, to have future opportunities in that sector. And we also have hobbies, for example, who are just having fun. Specific to machine learning, for example, we have pioneers who aim to advance human knowledge, to contribute to research. They don't want to do anything other than that. And then we have two segments that are focused on getting direct revenue out of development, either through selling apps or through contract work. And then we have people who do so indirectly. They want to monetize indirectly, either as part of the enterprise IT department. So these are the optimizers who increase organizational efficiency or reduce costs. But also people like product extenders. They're usually found within the marketing department of large organizations, and they're trying to promote a non-tech product, or otherwise they're just doing customer analysis, trying to sell a product. So these are, I won't go through each and every segment here. The idea is that developers may have different motivations across segments. So a developer may very well be, and it's a quite common scenario actually, be a hunter, so generating direct revenue, or a gun for hire in a sector, usually a mature one like desktop or web or mobile, while they're being explorers or pioneers in an emerging sector. Really typical, right? They're monetizing out of the mature sector where they know how things work, and they're exploring the new sector to figure out if they can somehow make it work for them. So motivation should be taken into account, but all motivations across all sectors. Okay, these were just a few, very few examples of things that can go wrong with segmentation. Other examples include practices that have to do revenues, for example. People segmenting on revenues find themselves in trouble. But I won't go more into what doesn't work. I'll show you what does work. So our database approach, what we do is that we rely on the data to speak unsupervised. Unsupervised, well, it's a class of models, but it also means that we do not make any prior assumptions. We do not ask the models to figure out something specific. We just try to identify clusters, to identify really homogeneous groups, as we just said. Okay, so what do we include in our models to come up with those segments? Really broad range of things. Demographics is one, involvement in each area, whether they are professionals or not, their role, if they're professionals, their industry also, whether they're making decisions about tools, tool purchasing decision that is, their coding experience, and many, many more. What we do not include, definitely, are technology choices, because I said that's very problematic, and revenues or revenue models. All right, so based on all those inputs, we use those, and we run, at the end of the day, clustering analysis with a few steps in between. And then that's not the end of the road. Suppose we do have satisfactory clusters, that's not the end of the road. Why not? Well, if we were to feed those clusters into a recommendation system, for example, then would be fine. That would be the end of the road. The thing is that we really, with segmentation, our clients are the marketing people, right? So it has to be, whatever we produce has to be well explained and understood by marketing folks, by humans, not by machines. And to make it work for marketeers, it has to be really well defined, a profile well explained, described, usually with a picture to go with that and a name. So these are the personas. So you need to go back from clusters, translate your clusters into personas. All right, so we actually did that, and we did that across all software developers. The idea was mostly to demonstrate the whole process rather than come up with personas that are useful to everyone. We don't get into that in a minute. We don't hope to make this work for everybody. But here's what we found. So there are 6 segments, 6 personas, and although we didn't design it that way, it just came up from the mold this way, as I swear. It appears that evolution of the developer is really what matters when defining distinct segments that behave in a distinct way. So our first segments are our young learners, who are, well, what's the word implies, young. They have to be below 34 to be in this group, but most of them are in their early to mid 20s. They are not professional typically, so they have to be at least learning or exploring one area to be in this group. And typically most of them are not professional. Some of them who are not in, they're in groups of up to 20 people. So really just a startup on the side or something like that. They don't take any tooling decisions. They don't buy tools, actually. They don't buy tools at all, right? They're youngsters, they're students, broke, no money. So then we have young professionals, just one step further up the ladder of evolution. Now, these are typically interested and motivated by making money somehow, and they are professional in at least one sector. They're also young, but on average, slightly older than young learners. Their company does buy tools, but they're the juniors, so they have nothing to do with those tool selections at all. Then we have the middle standards. Middle standards are a bit more experienced. They have nothing to do with the emerging sectors, though. They have a background in the more established sectors. Here we start seeing developers saying they have roles other than the typical, I'm just a programmer response. So we start seeing specialization here, and they also take part in the decision making, although they don't call the shots, they don't make the decisions. Then we have another group that is in parallel to this one. It's not further up. It's not another stage of evolution. So these are the emerging extenders. Emerging extenders are really interesting in my mind. They have a background in one of the mature sectors, mobile, desktop, web. And they are involved in at least one emerging area. So IoT, AR, VR, or machine learning. Not necessarily data science. They're not data scientists. The data scientists are quite different. They're ML developers. They're usually in up to medium-sized companies, and they do take part in tool purchasing decisions. And then we have the decision makers, who are the top of the hierarchy here. They are older than the others. They actually approve budgets, and they have the final decision on tools. They usually had several teams, and they are, of course, they have managerial roles or otherwise specialized roles. So they're the ones who actually you want to talk to if you're trying. They will decide if they want to buy a tool or not. Then last but not least, we have the inexperienced loaners, also not part of the evolution track. They're on the side path of their own. They're also older on the average, and they are the least experienced. They are involved in a very limited number of sectors. and they have very limited experience in the sectors they're involved in. They usually work alone or in groups of up to 5 people. And we find several roles. We have several designers, for example, in this group. Okay, so these are our 6 personas. Should you use them? Maybe, maybe not. Our personas here are just generic to all software developers out there. So they may not exactly fit your needs. Your audience may be a lot narrower than that. You may be active in a very specific field. So the very first step before you even start thinking about segmentation is to very clearly define your audience. And I mean, come on, that's a trivial question, right? You know your audience well. Yes, but in some cases, maybe not. Maybe that depends or is flexible according based on what you're trying to do here. What is the product that you're trying to promote? You may want to include a broader audience if you're trying to get people into machine learning, for example, through your solution. Then maybe you should include more developers outside the ML ecosystem to get them on board early, just an example. Okay, so once you have defined your audience, then you need to build a segmentation model that is specific to that audience. That may match our own or not. In most cases, expected to be similar. Similar things would surface as important, but it's not necessarily identical. Whatever you do, I mean, whatever your audience is, the methodology remains the same, what we have just discussed. So you have to make sure you come up with segments that are independent of what you're trying to predict, that are very homogeneous so that they can be trusted to behave in a certain way, all members behaving similarly, and that they're very distinct, each segment from each other, so that you can target each one of them with a distinct message. So that's all I had to share today, and we can move on to your questions.
Yeah, so we've got some great questions here, actually. An anonymous attendee asked, why do you exclude revenue as a segmentation filter? Isn't it a useful indicator for developers who want to run a successful business?
Okay, there are issues with revenues. Let's take, for example, well, in a nutshell, you would be excluding the long tail. So it depends also in which sector you're active, but if we take games as an example, there we have many hobbyists, and we also have people who are not, well, they're trying to make money, but they're not really making any money. And all of those put together account more than 70% of the game developers, right? So if you were to segment on revenues, you would be automatically be excluding something like more than half of the market. And we do know that these developers are the ones that really shape market shares. So that's one problem with revenues. The other thing about revenues is that they change. It's not a constant thing for the same, it's part of evolution. So it may also cause you trouble in that sense.
So I guess one of the questions that I might have is, when we talk about revenues, are we talking about the revenues of the business where the developer currently
yes.
belongs, or are we talking about, I don't know, something else? Their
salary? No, we're talking about the app revenue or the development related revenue that their company makes, or they make if they're just working as individuals.
And then these segments anyways, any one company could have all of these or most of these segments represented in there.
A company of developers, they may have different ones in there. Yes, a company will have juniors and a company will have seniors, right? It depends who you're trying to target.
All right. So if there are more questions, this is the perfect time to ask them using the chat or the questions toolbar on the right-hand side of the screen. Also, just a reminder, if you want a copy of the slides, you need to contact Slashdata directly. So Christina, what's your contact information if they want to have a copy of the slides?
Sophia, will you give that, please?
So we have Sophia as well from Slashdata. She's been quiet, but
Hi. Hello, everyone. I think you could just send an email to our marketing email, which is marketing@slashdata.co, and we will get back to you with an answer to your questions or the presentation, depending on what you would like to receive.
Wonderful. All right, well, it looks like it's the only question we got. This was a very, very thorough presentation. Your methodology seems quite sound, and segmentation is something that should be practiced across the board. Marketing sounds a little bit like a dirty word in some instances when it comes to developers and developer relations, but really, if you know your audience well, you can just drive better outcomes, right?
Yep, that's right. So thank you very much for hosting this, and everyone for attending.
Well, thank you.